Speaking of paranormal, you did mention 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And you know how 3 a.m. is like Devil's Hour? I did hear this superstition. See, it happened to us before as well.
What?
Like, remember when we received that random like ring at the door?
Oh, yeah.
We looked outside
And no one was there?
Nobody, bro.
Oh, so that's a thing too?
Yeah, they say that if you ever hear a random ass ring at the door, to never open the door because you're inviting an evil spirit or a spirit inside your crib.
I'm just not opening it in general. Like, that, even if it's a spirit or if it's a regular person.
It's also kind of creepy, bro, because I do remember we opened the door and stuff.
Yeah, like dumbasses.
And just recently, we had ordered Uber Eats, right?
Yeah.
This is real shit. I'm not making this up. The Uber Eats guy literally looks at the house and it's like, you guys have ghosts here, right?
The f do you mean?
He's like, my mom died when I was younger here.
Why the f would you say that?
My brother was like, what the fuck? Why do you say that?
That probably explains all and weird stuff that you guys heard, so it kind of makes sense actually.
Now it's even creepier, bro. Everything that we talk about, everything is shit. Hopefully I get to sleep at night, bro.
Granny Keeley experienced a devastating car crash in 2006. She was a passenger in a car that lost control after skidding on black ice, which resulted in hitting a wall. Granny's knees were then propelled into her face due to her knees being propped up on the dashboard. The impact happened when the airbag inflated at a staggering 200 miles per hour, resulting in very extreme facial injuries. Almost every single bone in her face was broken and she suffered a brain leak. Following the crash, Granny went through many medical procedures and due to an infection, doctors had to remove her forehead, leaving her without one for 2 years. However, in 2009, surgeons were able to reconstruct her face by fitting it with a ceramic forehead. Today, Granny is 39 years old and it looks like she didn't even go through any of this. This should be a reminder to everybody to never put your feet up on the dashboard because something like this could happen to any of us.
Name was Jeffrey Spade. This happened in February 1st of 2021. The victims were James and Lisa Goy. It's like mixed confusion in the comments. People are saying, oh, they deserved it, but also nobody deserves to die. So basically what happened is that the victims, they were the neighbors and they were shoveling snow, but they were shoveling snow onto his
property.
His backstory is that he's a veteran and he had served in the army. He's pretty up, and his wife had just died and shit too, so like he was, I guess, on edge constantly or whatever. Yeah. He was telling them, stop shoveling snow on my stuff, bro.
And what did they say?
That's when he goes inside, grabs his pistol, and then she goes ahead and says, shoots the wife and the husband and stuff, and then he literally comes out with a like AR-15, bro, and obviously does what he did, bro. The cops end up coming. They end up hearing one more shot inside the guy's house. Yeah.
So you said there's people defending the guy, or
not defending him, but also like coming at the victims and saying like why the fuck they did that. Like, in my honest opinion, bro, they did the wrong thing for like fucking with him, but that doesn't mean kill them. You know what I mean, bro? Like, call the cops on them, like tell them to stop.
A man was angry at his wife, so he drove their 2 children off a cliff. This is the incredible survival story of 2 absolute little angels. Robert Bryans is a 51-year-old from California. On the morning of the 13th of June 2020, Robert's wife made a panicked phone call to police. She said her and her husband had got into an argument. He had gotten in the car and drove off with their 2 twin girls. He was acting irrationally, threatening to drive them off a cliff, and he told his wife via text message, "The girls are going to heaven and I'm going to hell to wait for you." He then shockingly wrote a Facebook status which said, "Tonight I'm sending my babies to heaven," obviously in reference to his 2-year-old little girls. Police raced to the scene and tracked down Robert's truck. He'd driven off a cliff in San Diego with the 2 little girls inside. An officer spotted the man treading water with the 2 children. One was reportedly crying and one looked, in his opinion, lifeless. The officer performed a heroic rescue, despite Robert's attempt at a double murder and a self-unaliving. One of the children suffered severe brain injuries as a result of the horrific accident. Robert has pleaded guilty to attempted murder, DV and kidnapping amongst other charges, and faces 31 years in prison. This terrifying murder remains unsolved to this day. Rachel Anthony was 50 years old. She worked at Ultimate Liquors in Pine River, Minnesota. She was a mum of 3 and was described as a hard worker with a magnetic personality. On the 27th of February 2001, Rachel was working a late shift on her own. She usually followed the same kind of routine. She would exit through the front door to start her car up. She would go back inside and then lock the door behind her. She'd take the rubbish out to the bin at the back, locking the back door and leaving for the last time out of the front. Now, alarm bells started ringing when Rachel's car was found abandoned by a police officer. Her bag, coat and cigarettes were all inside. The car was unlocked and it appeared that she had left her car in a hurry. It was incredibly odd though for Rachel to just leave her children without saying anything. Although the store that she worked at had got security cameras, interestingly they weren't working that night. There was an initial search for Rachel, but it turned up absolutely nothing. That was until a group of teenagers made a horrifying discovery 6 weeks later. It was the 13th of April and her body was found in a ravine by Breezy Point. She'd been strangled to death. Her case was broadcast on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries, but that still failed to pull in any leads. It's now been over 2 decades and Rachel's killer is still walking free.
There's a couple days ago, Meta is making AI personas for us or whatever, and it's starting off right now for only celebrities. So celebrities are getting paid $5 million for them to attach their likeness onto fictional AI and basically do whatever the they want with your face.
Bro, that was literally a Black Mirror episode.
Exactly.
Hey guys, it's Billy. I just want to introduce myself. I am here to chat whenever you want. Message me for any advice. I am ready to talk and I hope to talk to you soon.
Oh, that's not actually Kendall Jenner. And then her following has a bunch of other AI personas.
So all those people already gave up their identity, bro.
Yes, Snoop Dogg, Mr. Beast was on here and stuff. It just got me thinking how this is going to be like the future of social media or just...
It's going to be literally fake, bro.
By next year, early next year, it should be available for other users.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and then it got me thinking about the Black Mirror episode, because in that episode, it was called Joan is Awful. She's literally just watching the Netflix version in that world, and her life starts playing
on
show,
the fucking screen, bro.
And it's cause the whole terms of service.
Yeah, when she signed up for it,
yeah,
she signed her identity away.
And the thing is, it's crazy that episode got greenlit to get released, because it basically exposed
what's going on.
Yeah.
If you think about it too, whenever you go into Apple, like terms of service as well, any small lettering, bro, there's always a catch, bro. And obviously nobody's gonna read all 20 pages of fucking shit. If you look in there, they have the right to...
This is probably the worst secret code name for an undercover operation that I've ever heard. John Arbogast was a 55-year-old school teacher from Georgia. He was teaching students social studies at a middle school in Cobb County, but had a hideous secret obsession with indecent images of children. He had a baseball card shop, and obviously due to this and his day job, he worryingly had huge access to children on a daily basis. He was found to be online constantly trafficking child SA images and was involved in a huge P ring. Now this caught the attention of the FBI, who created an undercover operation called Innocent Images. The operation spanned 2 years and started in 1993 after a 10-year-old boy vanished. This boy was George Badinsky, and the undercover operation led to the arrest of 12 men across the world, but frustratingly, George's case remains unsolved. In September 1995, before he could be arrested, John closed his shop and went on the run. His case then appeared on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries in 1996. He was last seen in Las Vegas, Nevada, but luckily due to the broadcast, police received a tip. They were told he was working at a hotel in LA, and police were able to hunt him down and arrest him. They captured him on the 11th of July 1997. He was frustratingly released from prison just 1 year later.
Tonight's video contains some of the most disturbing information that I've ever come across, and I think this is our most important video to date. In tonight's documentary, we explore Midnight Productions, the mythical almost group that supposedly has been preying on homeless individuals, men, women, and children in Arizona for decades now. And in this documentary, we talked to ex-law enforcement officials who claimed almost half of the Phoenix Police Department to this day believes in Midnight Productions. We talked to homeless individuals living on the streets in Phoenix who also claimed they had seen Midnight Productions, they knew them, they knew people who disappeared or were disappeared by them. And it gets into some really, really disturbing stuff. The paranormal activity and evidence that we captured in the video also led us to locations that you're going to see in the video. We found some incredibly disturbing, shocking stuff. We got some direct answers, and Online, everywhere you look, when you bring up Midnight Productions, everyone just says it's this big myth. But if you start looking beyond that, I think you're going to see that there is something incredibly sinister, dark, disturbing, and twisted happening in Arizona that nobody is talking about. So this is a passion project that I've worked on for months. We filmed this back in April, and I'm really, really excited to give this information out to you guys. Please help me out by sharing tonight's premiere, joining in, leaving a comment and a like, and boosting it. Anyways, I'll see you guys soon. This is not an episode to miss.
There's a really sad and scary story unfolding in Arizona right now. So on the morning of May 22nd, 46-year-old Hope Tucker and her adult son were driving on Interstate 10 in Buckeye when their car broke down. It's important to note that Hope's son is autistic and mostly nonverbal. They broke down between Verrado Way and Watson Road. Police believe that Hope, her son, and their dog got out and started walking on foot to either find shade or help, but they ended up disappearing. Their car was found that day and towed away by the Department of Public Safety. 2 days later, her son was found extremely dehydrated at a gas station on Watson Road, just a few miles away from where their car broke down. He was then hospitalized for an entire month before being reunited with his grandpa. But during his month-long hospital stay, he never once mentioned that his mom was missing or still out there somewhere in the desert. It wasn't until he was with his grandpa on June 22nd, exactly 1 month later, that he told his grandpa what happened, and his grandpa then called the police. Because her son is mostly nonverbal, police brought in a specialized forensic interviewer to get as much information from him as they could to help find his mom. He ended up telling police that his mom passed away the same day that their car broke down. He said that after they were walking for a while, Hope laid down to rest, closed her eyes, and just stopped breathing. So Buckeye police started looking for her that day. They brought in tracking dogs, drones, and ATVs to search for her, but at this point, things weren't looking good because they were already a month behind. But after a 2-week search, authorities found the remains of Hope and her dog just this past Monday. They found her just outside of the Sienna Hills community near Verrado Way and Thomas Road. Where she was found was less than 2 miles from Interstate 10. At this point, police say they don't suspect foul play as her body showed no obvious signs of trauma, and her cause of death has yet to be determined. The area where they broke down is in the middle of the desert, really undeveloped, and has some pretty steep hills. It was also close to 100 degrees the day she went missing. The story is so heartbreaking, and I truly can't imagine what they both went through out there all alone.
According to a recent lawsuit that was filed, P. Diddy might be a pedophile. This new lawsuit alleges that P. Diddy constantly held parties at his house that involved minors, adults who were assaulting these minors, male and female sex workers that were servicing everybody. And this lawsuit even alleges that P. Diddy himself spiked people's drinks at the party to get them looser and convince them to do whatever he wanted them to do. This lawsuit came from one of P. Diddy's former employees, a man nicknamed Little Rod. And this lawsuit is incredibly disturbing and paints a picture of Epstein-level allegations. Allegations that P. Diddy may have been involved in a trafficking ring of sorts. Allegations that P. Diddy forced his employees to go out and procure sex workers for him in his parties. Allegations that P. Diddy violently forced people to do things for him. Allegations that P. Diddy may have murdered people and admitted to it. Amongst many, many other allegations of assault, groping, and yeah, just so many different things. These are some really disturbing allegations, and while they haven't obviously been proven to be true in court yet, the team that actually put these allegations forward claims that they have hundreds of hours of video and audio evidence incriminating P. Diddy and his entire team in this string of illegal acts. I'm sure that this is going to be some really disturbing stuff. I'm going to be sure to cover this story as it unfolds more. And yeah, if this is all true, this is extremely dark and disturbing stuff. And I think that this web is going to spread very far across the music industry.
This man makes human soup for a Mexican cartel, and this is a massive trigger warning.
This is Santiago Mesa Lopez, and he turned the victims of the cartel into soup. Santiago was a skilled mason, so much so that he caught the eye of some members of the Tijuana cartel. They then hired him to do construction work for them and take care of their horses. Santiago proved to be a hard-working employee who never questioned his bosses or a task. So they decided to bring him on board the Tijuana cartel and show him the ropes. He rose through the ranks of the cartel from drug dealer to the rank of drug office keeper. It was a risky job, but years later, Santiago was still alive and had his job. But things became complicated when Santiago's cartel got into a war with another cartel. The streets of Tijuana became a battleground with thousands of people getting killed and their bodies getting abused daily. This then got the attention of the Mexican authorities and the DEA and the FBI. And the cartel soon realized they had to get rid of the bodies quickly and quietly. They then got the idea from dangerous people who make people disappear, and the idea was to turn them into soup. But they needed someone they can trust fully to do the dirty work, and that person was Santiago Mesa Lopez. They then brought him into a room for an experiment. In the room was a 200-liter drum filled with caustic concoction of water, soda, and other chemicals. They then brought in the dead body of a victim of the cartel war. Santiago was then ordered to strip the body and stuff it into the drum. He did this without asking any questions or blinking an eye. They then all watched as the body started to dissolve in the liquid, so they left it overnight. The next morning, they came back to see the body had completely dissolved, leaving behind smudge and bone fragments. Santiago then got a new title called the Stew Maker. This title fit him well as he was the one stirring the bodies in the drum, turning them into soup. As the stew maker, his task was simple but brutal: dissolve the victims of the cartel in acid. While the cartel was destroying and killing their enemies, Santiago was making soup with what was left of their bodies and erasing every bit of evidence from the cartel's crimes. Santiago operated in numerous locations, mostly near remote ranches or farms bordering the United States. He took deliveries of the bodies in different locations, and in some months, Santiago got 30 to 50 bodies to completely dissolve and disappear. He would chop up the bodies in smaller pieces and then dump them into the drum containing the acid solution. The process could take several hours depending on the size of the body. He would then stir the mixture occasionally with a wooden stick or metal rod. And the pieces that weren't dissolved properly, like teeth and some bone fragments, were then burned with gasoline. The liquid from the barrels was then poured into rivers or wells, but as Santiago became more skilled, he constructed drainage systems that made it easier for him and his crew to dispose of the remains without having to carry the heavy barrels of liquefied humans. Santiago was said to have dissolved over 1,000 bodies in his career, and for his service, he was making $600 weekly. This is absolutely crazy, and many people say he could have said no, but if he did, those might have been his last words he ever spoke. And would you rather be in the pot or stir it? Santiago definitely did what he did only to survive. But if you want a part 2 explaining the aftermath, just let me know and I'll make it.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Total of 37 people arrested accused of child crimes, now locked up.
Yeah, this is just a horrific story.
If you don't know who Midnight Productions is, they do horrible things on the dark web. YouTube is filled with numerous stories. It is not a myth. They're not a fantasy. They're not a conspiracy. They are actually true.
Be aware, Midnight Productions is a band of people who go around picking up young women, young girls, taking them back to their hideout, them, filming it while they're raping them. They'll cut them up in pieces. They'll kill you. Midnight Productions are people that you need to stay away from. Cops, lawyers, judges.
Intense video released from Phoenix police showing a possible kidnapping.
Police need the public's help identifying who is in this video.
The mugshots of more than 30 accused predators, allegations of child trafficking, luring of a minor for exploitation. Investigators went undercover, placing ads on websites and apps commonly used by suspects targeting children for.
This is horribly wrong. They are looking to manipulate and exploit children.
A home surveillance camera captured that chilling moment where the girl barely got away from the man running after her.
It's the most terrifying thing as a grandfather, as a father, can never go through.
Midnight Productions is real shit. They don't know a lot of people are missing that house. There's baby cribs, the lights for films. They had rooms with like cages. You go in the house and then the wall would have you could step into some weird tunnel shit.
This is a prison cell. Only kids are being held down here.
The underground bunker, it was basically a giant plastic container with a hole only small enough for a child to crawl in and out of. A small child that was in there could not have gotten out on their own.
There's a child's vanity.
and a hospital toilet. That looks like a child's car seat, strollers and children's toys and clothing and food packets and stuff like that. So clearly children had been kept here. But one thing that was really disturbing was there were arm restraints, wrist restraints on 2 trees angled like this to where that's a tree. That looks exactly like wrist restraints for a tree. It doesn't look like anything else.
There's the Midnight Productions out here, and it is right here. That shit is everywhere. It's a human trafficking. It's every day. People will, come and lure you in and then take you and you are a sex slave until they are done with that and then chop you up and sell your body parts.
These guys set me up to be tortured by Midnight Productions. It's a conspiracy among conspiracies. If it's true, man, God help us. But
Phoenix is on pace for a record-breaking number of homeless deaths. According to new data from the Maricopa County Medical Examiner's Office, more than 300 homeless people have already died this year.
It's a body donation and tissue bank in Phoenix, Arizona. It was raided back in 2014 in a human body parts trafficking investigation.
He found a cooler filled with male genitalia, a bucket of heads, arms, and legs, infected heads, and one of the most disturbing findings, called a morbid joke in the lawsuit, a small woman's head sewn onto a large male torso like Frankenstein and hung up on the wall.
This is one of the most disturbing images that you will ever see for multiple reasons. Let's talk about it. This is an x-ray of the pelvis of serial killer and cannibal Albert Fish. Albert had a serious self-harm and sexual mutilation kink, and in this x-ray, 29 self-embedded needles were lodged into his pelvic region. This in itself is incredibly disturbing, but who Albert Fish was and what he did is horrifying. Albert Fish, also known as the boogeyman in the Brooklyn Vampire, S.A.'d, killed and cannibalized at least 3 children between 1924 and 1928, but he was a suspect in at least 10 other murders and bragged about possibly having 100 victims. After Albert's dad died when he was really young, his mom placed him into an orphanage where he was often physically abused, but after a while he began to enjoy the physical pain from the beatings. By the age of 12, he began drinking urine and eating feces and would often spy on other young boys and watch them undress. By 20, he began S.A.ing little boys, mostly under the age of 6, and it was around this time that he married a woman named Anna. They went on to have 6 kids together. Although his life seemed normal on the outside, his secret disturbing behavior would begin to escalate when in 1910 he met a teenager named Thomas. The two began a sadomasochistic relationship, and just 10 days into the relationship, Albert took him to an old farmhouse where he tortured him over a period of 2 weeks. He originally wanted to kill Thomas and dismember his body to take home, but it was really hot out at the time, and he said he feared someone would notice. So instead, he cut off half of Thomas's poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in a towel covered in Vaseline, and then gave him $10. Albert then left him there and never looked back. A few years later, his wife would leave him, and it was at this point that Albert began having hallucinations and began to self-harm. This is where he picked up the habit of self-embedding the needles into his pelvic region. He would also repeatedly hit himself with a nail-studded paddle, amongst other really disturbing things that I cannot say on here. At this point, Albert would escalate to torturing, mutilating, and murdering young children because he said that God was commanding him to do so. He would use tools that he called his implements of hell, which included a meat cleaver, a butcher knife, and a handsaw. He went on to murder 10-year-old Grace Budd in the summer of 1928 after the Budd family put out an ad in the newspaper. Grace's brother Edward was looking for work, and Albert responded to the ad under the pretense of wanting to hire Edward. But instead he saw Grace, and he convinced her parents to let him take her to his niece's birthday party, which unfortunately was a complete lie. Instead, Albert took Grace to an abandoned house in Irvington, New York, where he strangled her to death. He then decapitated her and dismembered her body and ate most of her remains over the next few days. One of the most disturbing things about Albert was that he was known to write disturbing letters to the victims' families, and that's exactly what he did to the Budd family. Albert sent them an extremely gruesome and disturbing letter detailing what he did to Grace, how it took 9 days to eat her entire body. And in this letter, he also detailed other horrific child murders. One was the murder of 9-year-old Francis McDonnell, who disappeared after playing catch with some friends. He was later found hanging from a tree in a wooded area near his home. He had been S.A.'d and strangled with his suspenders. He also had extreme lacerations to his legs and stomach, and his left hamstring had almost entirely been stripped of its flesh. The next confession was the murder of 4-year-old William Gaffney, Albany. On February 11th, 1927, William was playing in his apartment hallway with a 3-year-old named Billy and Billy's 12-year-old brother. After a while, the 12-year-old stepped away, and it was at that moment that both the little boys disappeared. Billy was later found on the apartment roof, and when police asked him what happened to William, Billy said that the boogeyman took him. A witness later identified Albert as the person who kidnapped William that day, and although William's body was never found, Albert explained in great detail what he did to him in a letter that he wrote. Albert wrote how he cooked and ate his body parts in a stew. Albert was arrested for the kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd, in which he was convicted. He was executed by electric chair on January 16, 1936, at the age of 65 years old. Right before his execution, Albert wrote down his final confessions and gave them to his lawyer, but his lawyer said that he would never show them to anyone because of how disturbing they were. Albert Fish is one of the scariest men to ever exist. In July of 2007, this entire family, who was part of a doomsday cult, mysteriously disappeared. Let's talk about it. So this is Simon Cadwell, his partner Chantel McDougall, their 5-year-old daughter Leela, and their friend Antonio Popic. Simon was an internet doomsday cult leader who published books about his beliefs, and he created a website called The Truth Fellowship. He had a pretty large following too. They all lived in a house on a remote property in a small town in Western Australia called Nannup. They disappeared in the summer of 2007 after telling friends and family that they were moving to Brazil to join a spiritual community because they felt that they didn't belong in modern society. But in the months leading up to their disappearance, Simon told a woman in his online cult forum that he was planning a peaceful family suicide pact, and after, Antonio would bury their bodies in bushes before killing himself in the wilderness so no one would find his body either. When the woman questioned why he would be okay with killing his young daughter, Simon backtracked and said that they would just move to an isolated area where no one could ever reach them. Those who knew Simon said he was strange and controlling and at the time was on antipsychotic medication. Those same people also said that Chantel and Antonio were brainwashed by him and would do anything he said. The beginning of this strange mystery starts in May of 2007 when Simon was pulled over while driving. Someone had tipped off the police stating that Simon wasn't who he said he was, and when police looked into this, they discovered that he had stolen a birth certificate from a former coworker and had stolen his identity. In all reality, Simon's real name was Gary Felton, and he had fooled everyone for the longest time. So during that traffic stop, police were questioning his driver's license, which made Simon panic. 2 months later, the entire family would vanish. Right before their disappearance, Simon and Chantel sold their cars for somewhat cheap, and Chantel cashed the check for that at the bank on July 13th. The next day, which was their last known sighting, Chantel met with a woman to sell her 2 of the family's pet dogs. The woman who bought the dogs was originally supposed to meet up with Chantel the next day, but when she called Chantel, Chantel said, quote, "No, you must come today." The woman said that Chantel appeared super anxious and that the entire encounter made her feel so uncomfortable. A few days later, their landlord went to their Nannup house, and it was an eerie scene. The house was spotless, and all of their personal belongings were gone. The only thing left behind was half a bowl of rice and 2 notes, one from Antonio and one from Chantel, who said that the entire family moved to Brazil. They were reported missing sometime later, and what police found during their investigation only brings more questions. Just 2 days before they disappeared, a call was made from their Nannup home to Transwa, which is a public transportation company in Australia. Whoever called booked a bus ticket from Bridgetown to Northcliffe under the name of J. Roberts, but it was never used. But 2 tickets under that same name were used the morning of July 16th. One going from Perth to Kalgoorlie and one from Perth to Northcliffe. A passenger under the name of J. Roberts did get off at Northcliffe and someone did board a train to Kalgoorlie, but there's no evidence of anything after this. The day before, Antonio's phone traced to Perth and it was used to call a Domino's Pizza and a hotel. His driver's license was also used to check into a hostel in Northbridge. This was confirmed to be him, as the Domino's driver confirmed Antonio was the guy he delivered the pizza to that night. As the other 2 tickets were being used the morning of the 16th, Antonio called Transwa for reasons unknown, and then he too vanished off the face of the earth. The investigation wasn't handled properly and lots of things slipped under the rug, like how a woman's shirt that possibly belonged to Chantel was found in a field in Northcliffe 3 months after she disappeared. The person who found it said it smelled like rotting flesh. This lead wasn't investigated until 2015, 8 years later, and at this point, a wildfire had come through and burnt everything up. In 2011, a Gary Felton checked into a caravan park in King River, which is near Albany. Authorities hunted down every Gary Felton in the country, but nothing ever came of it. Chantel's family is currently currently trying to raise funds to launch a new investigation to find them. They've even created a GoFundMe to help. At this point, her family believes that Chantel and Leila are likely dead and buried somewhere in Western Australia. This case has left me with so many questions. Did the entire family move to Brazil like they said? Or are they living off-grid under different names? Did they take their own lives, or were they possibly murdered? So many questions remain unanswered. Their bank accounts have not been touched since the day they disappeared. Whatever happened to this family remains a mystery 17 years later.
This mom hunted down cartel members for killing her daughter. This is Miriam Rodriguez, and she hunted down 10 cartel members for killing her daughter. On a fateful day in 2012, Karen Rodriguez, who was Miriam's daughter, was driving her truck when suddenly 2 trucks encircled her. 2 men then came at her with guns and dragged her from the car and into theirs. Later, the 2 men took her to the Rodriguez family home and tied her up. They were about to proceed with their ransom plan when a family member dropped by and witnessed the scene. At this point, the kidnappers decided to abduct both Karen and the family friend. After the kidnappings, Karen's family started receiving threats and ransom demands. Miriam and her family had no choice but to take out a loan from the bank to pay for their daughter's ransom. This was because there were so many ransoms in the city that the bank was giving out ransom loans. Miriam and her husband were then told to drop the ransom off at a local medical facility. They waited and waited, but nobody showed up. Miriam then demanded to meet with the gang members and they agreed. The meeting took place at a local restaurant. She met with a man who tried to demand more money from her without saying where her daughter was. Miriam was then asked for an extra $2,500. The family continued to wait, but Karen never returned. Miriam knew at this point that her daughter Karen would not be returning. The heartbroken mother then vowed to find every single one of her daughter's kidnappers. The family friend who was also kidnapped was let go shortly after it happened because he offered no value. Miriam then pressed him for the physical appearance of the gang members, and he did. This was enough to confirm the man she met with, who was named Sama, was involved in her daughter's disappearance. Miriam then spent hours searching on Karen's social medias looking for any clues about her kidnapping. Miriam then came across a picture of Sama with a girl at an ice cream shop 2 hours away, so she decided to go there. She then located the store and began stalking it regularly. She then recognized the woman from the picture with Sama and studied her work hours, patiently waiting for Sama to show up. Finally, when she spotted Sama coming to the store, Miriam waited to follow the couple home and get their address. Miriam then had to get closer to these people, so she went undercover. She cut her hair and dyed it red and put on an old government uniform. She then went door to door in Sama's neighborhood doing fake surveys. She then spent some more time identifying and locating more gang members from Sama's crew. And before you know it, Miriam located a picture of Sama with a group of his fellow gang members. On September 15th, 2014, Miriam's son was closing his shop when he noticed a familiar face. It was Sama. He then immediately called his mother. Sama was then arrested and quickly gave the names of the people involved in Karen's abduction. And finally, they got word of Karen's location. The gang members said, "I'm willing to take you to the ranch where they killed and buried them." When they went to the ranch, they found Karen's scarf, her car cushion, and her femur bone, confirming her death. Miriam continued to try and find her daughter's killers, though. Miriam traced a member named Flores back to his hometown and discovered he attended church. So Miriam started attending Mass and stalking the church. Eventually, she contacted the authorities over her findings and Flores was arrested. But Miriam isn't done there. After receiving a tip, Miriam located a man selling sunglasses near the Mexican-United States border. The man immediately recognized her and began to run away, but Miriam came prepared. She ran after him and tackled him to the ground and pointed a gun at him. Miriam then detained him for about an hour until police arrived. But after hearing about what Miriam was doing, cartels began to threaten her, which made her seek help from the Mexican government, and she requested special protection. During an incident, some prisoners were able to escape the jail where her daughter's kidnappers were being held. And on May 17, 2017, Miriam was found dead outside her home. On May 10, 2017, which is Mexico's Mother's Day, Miriam was shot with 13 bullets by the same prisoners who escaped. In her quest to seek justice, Miriam became a symbol of courage and resistance against the criminal underworld. This goes to show the love a mother has for their kids. Miriam was going against a very powerful cartel, and in my opinion, beat them in more ways than they beat her. Rest in peace to Miriam, you will never be forgotten.
This woman, 44-year-old J.D. Watts, intentionally handed her mother, who had severe dementia, a handgun so that she could just take her own life. J.D. was her mother's primary caregiver, and it's been said that she was just sick and tired of taking care of her mother. On September 10th, home surveillance footage shows J.D. leaving her mother's bedroom with a handgun. Then she showed her mother how to use it and basically told her to use it on herself. 72-year-old Linda then fired 2 shots, taking her own life. Investigators found evidence of JD being extremely cruel to her mother. She was constantly speaking down to her and referred to her as a toddler. JD always complained about being her mother's caregiver and just wanted her to die. But she did not get away with this and was charged with felony murder in the 2nd degree.
I started shooting with a firearm in a McDonald's because the employee had forgotten the bacon in my burger. My name is Shenika Monique Torres, and I was 30 years old in 2015 when I went to McDonald's to order food. I placed my usual order at the drive-thru of a McDonald's in Michigan, ordering cheeseburgers with bacon. When I received my order, to my great disappointment, the bacon was missing from the cheeseburgers. I felt horribly betrayed and asked to speak to a restaurant manager. He apologized for the mistake and offered me a free meal as a goodwill gesture. I accepted his offer and left the McDonald's. A few hours later, hunger began to set in again. I returned to the same McDonald's and ordered the same burger once more. The employee who prepared my bacon burger forgot the bacon again. This triggered an indescribable rage in me. I then pulled out my gun and fired through the drive-thru window. Fortunately, there were no casualties. I was arrested and sentenced to serve a prison term of 3 to 7 years. What judgment do you think I deserve for what I did because of that employee who forgot the bacon?
I glued my husband's penis to his stomach while he was sleeping. I am Tracy Wood Davis, a woman who discovered that her husband was cheating. When I learned the news, I was devastated and furious, and I decided to seek revenge in a creative way to make him understand the extent of his betrayal. One night, while my husband was sound asleep, I carefully applied super glue to his penis and glued it to his stomach. My goal was to cause him embarrassment and discomfort, making him realize the pain he had inflicted on me by cheating. The next morning, my husband woke up and discovered with horror what I had done. He was forced to see a doctor to resolve the delicate situation I had put him in. My story quickly made headlines, and I became infamous for my act of revenge. I hope that my story can serve as a lesson to others facing similar situations, encouraging them to find constructive solutions to deal with infidelity.
So, I put detergent in my water every single day, and let me tell you why.
Why are there so many people on this app eating laundry detergent? I've seen a lot of bad medical advice on here, but eating laundry detergent straight out of the box for medical purposes seems to be the worst. It's ironic because tonight's episode is all about horrible medical advice that's been given throughout history. And if you think drinking borax is bad, wait until you hear about the time that a bunch of housewives accidentally got hooked on meth. So basically, during World War II, this new inhaler comes out. And doctors soon figure out that patients love this inhaler. Like, love it so much, they buy the inhaler just to crack it open and eat the medicine out of it. And doctors also realize that the patients are losing a lot of weight, which is something they can make money off of. So enter amphetamine-based weight loss pills. Doctors were prescribing this meth microdose to women by the handful. And at first, women were like, great, I have all this energy and I'm losing weight. But then they started experiencing something called amphetamine psychosis. Like, they were straight up seeing demons in their toilets and thought everyone wanted to kill them. This is one of many pieces of terrible medical advice that's been given throughout history, so follow along for more tonight. Don't get me wrong, the new Willy Wonka movie looks fine, but there's no way it's going to be as dark as the original book. We're talking dark enough to not make any cut of any of the movies. Also, I cover stuff for the darkly curious here, and if that's you, you might like the podcast. So in all the movies, we see the Oompa Loompas as these singing, dancing, unbothered henchmen of Willy Wonka's. But in the book, they are so much darker than that. In the book, Oompa Loompas are pygmies from Africa that Willy Wonka kidnapped and brought to his factory. Look at this passage. Once Willy Wonka realizes that they'll work for beans, he shipped them over here, every man, woman, and child in the Oompa Loompa tribe. It was easy. I smuggled them over in large packing cases with holes in them, and they all got here safely. But the book came out in 1964, and at that point, slavery had been abolished in the UK for almost 160 years. So rightfully so, people were not happy with this portrayal. But this is just a good reminder that Willy Wonka is the villain of these movies. He's a curmudgeon-y shut-in with Peter Pan syndrome who invites children to his factory to watch them die. And then he acts as if you're the one annoying him. Anyways, this one looks very light and fluffy and not that.
My mother killed me by throwing me out of the car window when I was only 2 months old. My name is Arya Rose, and this event occurred on November 20th, 2018, in Bali. My mother, Nicole Stasio, 32 years old, and originally from California, had taken me with her in the car. While we were driving, my mother unfastened me, then opened the window and heartlessly threw me out. Due to the speed at which we were traveling, I died instantly. My mother continued to drive at high speed, then opened the car door and threw herself out in an attempt to commit suicide. She didn't die but suffered serious injuries without any lasting consequences. Investigators discovered that she was suffering from severe postpartum depression, which would explain why she committed this horrendous act. My mother, Nicole Stasio, was not interrogated or judged for her actions due to her mental health condition. No justice was therefore served for what my mother did to me that day.
Did you guys know that these Disney stars were arrested and some even spent time in prison? Starting with the one that shocked me the most, Phil Lewis, who played Mr. Mosby on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. He went to prison for manslaughter. So in 1991, way before The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody aired, Phil killed a 21-year-old girl while drinking and driving. But he was released early and only served 1 year because of the work he did in prison. Next, we got Debbie Ryan, who played Bailey Pickett on The Sweet Life on Deck. When Debbie was 22 years old, she was arrested and charged with a DUI after she crashed her car with another person and severely injured them. Okay, this one's crazy. Back in 2018, Adam Hicks, who starred in Zeke and Luther, was arrested after going around pointing guns at people and robbing them with the help of his girlfriend, Danny. He ended up getting only 5 years in prison, and now he's pursuing his music career and he's on TikTok. Now, this one definitely caught me off guard because Mitchell Musso played such an innocent kid on Hannah Montana, but he was arrested for public intoxication on August 26th of this year when he apparently stole a bag of chips from a store, but he denies this ever happened. Mitchell was also arrested back in 2011 when he was 20 years old for a DUI. Let me know which one surprised you the most because mine was Mr. Mosby.
This person predicted 9/11 and now they're predicting a nuclear war in 2023. This is the famous blind fortune teller named Baba Vanga. She predicted the 9/11 attacks and also is predicting a nuclear disaster that will devastate the entire planet before the end of 2023. Although she passed away over 25 years ago, many of her predictions are believed to have come true even after her death. Baba Vanga is said to have foreseen that a powerful country will use a biological weapon in 2023, resulting in a large number of deaths. She also predicted the end of natural pregnancies this year, with babies all being born and created in a laboratory, and the selection of specific traits like hair and eye color being controlled by the government and medical experts. It's crazy that Baba Vanga predicted this because a recent article just came out that lab-made babies could be a reality by 2028. But let's see if Baba Vanga predicts it correctly and it happens 5 years before. It's not like everything Baba Vanga predicts comes true, but a lot of the things she does predict come true, like 9/11. All in all, do you think a nuclear disaster is going to happen in 2023? Or do you think Baba Vanga is just predicting nonsense? I hope she is because I don't want any sort of nuclear war ever on Earth. And let's all hope Baba Vanga is wrong.
A Pennsylvania woman was charged with plotting to have her ex-husband's new wife killed after an undercover sting. A 56-year-old woman in Pennsylvania was arrested after allegedly attempting to hire a hitman to murder her ex-husband's new wife and her teenage daughter. Marilyn Zhu was arrested on December the 18th, 2022 and charged with attempted murder and money laundering. In December 2022, intelligence came in that Marilyn was potentially searching for a murder for hire. The Special Investigations Unit intervened to try and catch her in the act. Marilyn allegedly met up with a man that she didn't realise was an undercover police officer. She was apparently attempting to put the plan in motion. It's reported that Marilyn gave the officer 2 photos of the intended victim, $21,000 in cash, rubber gloves and a towel to assist in carrying out the crime. It's alleged that Marilyn told the undercover officer that if it happened that the victim's daughter was there when the murder took place, she would actually need to be killed too. It's believed to have been agreed that Marilyn would then pay the hitman $20,000 extra once the job was done. Shortly after this, Marilyn was arrested, and when they searched her property, they discovered another $18,000 in cash. She's currently being held until her trial.
This is insane. This pilot was sucked out of a plane during a flight from England to Spain. This happened on June 10th, 1990 on a British Airways flight when 27 minutes into the flight, two of the cockpit windows came off, which caused the pilot Timothy Lancaster to be sucked out. But you would think that someone wouldn't survive this. Well, Timothy did. Since the plane was going at such a high speed, his entire body got trapped against the outside of the plane window, but his legs were still in the plane. That's when one of the flight attendants quickly grabbed Timothy's legs and held on the entire time while the co-pilot controlled the plane and tried to land right away. So imagine everyone on that flight was freaking out while Timothy was trapped against the plane for a remainder of 20 minutes at nearly 650 kilometers per hour. And by the way, if Timothy was let go, his body would have landed on the side of the wing and made its way into the engine, which would have caused the plane to crash. Fortunately, the co-pilot was able to safely land the plane, and when an investigation was done, it was discovered that the maintenance crew had replaced the window panels with incorrect bolts, which caused the windows to be blown out. Timothy explains that he was in and out of consciousness but barely remembers anything, which thank God. And get this, Timothy was back to work only 5 months later. Personally, I would never step into a plane again, let alone fly it.
This is some dark stuff going on around the world that the public definitely doesn't know about. Up first, humanity has wiped out 60% of the animal population since 1970. Just think about that for a second. 60% of all animal population has been wiped out. This is absolutely crazy, and we use all of these resources for food and clothes and just stuff like that. But when you hear that we killed 60% of the animal population, it kind of makes you think, right? Next up, we all know the mega city that Saudi Arabia is building called Neom. But did you know Saudi Arabia is sentencing people to death who refuse to move out of their homes so they could actually build the mega city Neom? And their relatives are being sentenced to multiple decades of prison time just for protesting and posting their support to the cause on social media. This is absolutely sickening, and I can't believe nobody is talking about this. This next one is going to keep us all up at night. But bacterial resistance to antibiotics is at an alarming level. There has already been instances of pan-antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria. This can throw us back to the pre-antibiotic era, which will effectively mean if you catch an infection, you will die, just like in the 1400s. Finally, women are going missing from Indian reservations across some of the United States. Many are young women and are probably being used for sex trafficking. I wonder why they're taking Indian women from Indian reservations. And I wonder why sick stuff happens like this on Earth every single day.
Someone escaped her kidnapper after being held captive for a year. The woman, whose identity is not revealed for her own safety, met James Perillo Jr. at a petrol station in New Mexico in February last year. 57-year-old James told her his name was Brett Parker. He asked if she would give him a lift to Arizona, and she quite liked him, so she said yes. The pair actually got into a consensual relationship, and things were going fine for a while until he began assaulting her. He started isolating her from family and friends and confiscated her phone and debit cards, leaving her powerless. He then spent the next year holding her captive against her will. He was actually travelling around the country with her, and prior to her escape, James had driven them to a petrol station in New Jersey. She noticed that the store had a deadbolt on the door from the inside, and it inspired her to escape. James had been continuously beating and choking her, and on the day in question, she was able to break free for a couple of seconds. It was cold out, but she sprinted back to the petrol station that they'd been at, with only a shirt and shorts on and no shoes. She ran inside and bolted the door shut just in time, as James was only a few seconds behind her. The attendant inside the petrol station helped her after the woman explained that she'd been held captive. She had deep wounds on her neck from where he'd been abusing her. James was arrested and is being held without bail due to information that police had discovered. It transpired that he may have had other victims previously. He's being charged with first-degree kidnapping, second-degree strangulation, and aggravated assault. He faces up to 47 years in prison.
This sick woman has been nicknamed the nanny from hell, and the stories of her abuse are sickening. Let me tell you, viewer discretion is heavily advised for this TikTok. So this is Nicole Lynn Walter. She was 27 years old when she was arrested, and she's from Florida. And between 2017 and 2018, she abused the children that she was nannying. The The kids were only 3 years old and 15 years old, and she had been charging her clients online different rates, more expensive and less expensive, for the different types of abuse she was carrying out on these kids. Now, when investigators interviewed the 3-year-old that Nicole had been nannying, she said that Nicole, her nanny, had been, behaving inappropriately with her, and she told investigators that Nicole had been touchy with her privates. Now, when investigators got a search warrant and executed it on Nicole's home, they found a micro SD card that contained disgusting, according to them, vile images of a minor. Images that Nicole had taken herself. They also found video files on Nicole's computer that showed her completely bare in front of the children that she had been nannying, talking to the kids while she was playing with herself, if you know what I'm talking about. As in, she was toying with herself while she was talking to the kids she was nannying right there on camera. I mean, how disturbing can the story get? When pressed about all of this, Nicole told investigators that she recorded, uploaded, and sold this content to clients on the internet who were requesting her to make these sorts of sick and twisted videos. Now, keep in mind, Nicole was also uploading adult videos and images of herself to the internet and charging for them without the kids involved. But like we said at the beginning, if there were kids involved, she would charge clients extra based on what they wanted. So this is a sick story. This is a very sick individual. And this once again goes to show that it's not only men who can be pedophiles, it can be anybody. And sometimes these people don't look at all like what you would expect them to.
This is the bear video, one of the worst animal attacks caught on camera, explained. The local forest department of this village organized this bear hunt because of the bear attacks against humans in the area. The man in the video was tracking the bear for a while and even set up a trap, but he was ambushed and mauled. The victim's piercing screams alerted his colleagues, who would rush to the scene, and one of the victim's fellow hunters filmed the gruesome encounter. As you play the video, you see the man laid out on the floor wearing a green jacket with the female sloth bear on top of him, and immediately you hear the victim's awful screams, and these screams are way different from any of the screams you will ever hear. The camera zooms in and you see the bear has almost mounted the victim and has its jaws locked around the victim's face. And it seems the bear is going for the throat. Loud commotion can be heard in the background, and the crowd tries to stop the bear from attacking by firing their guns and throwing stones at it. As the victim wrestles underneath the bear, you see some of his injuries. His face and throat are covered in blood, and the ground is also stained with blood. You can see the bear bite his face and pull, ripping a piece of flesh from his face. The bear then shakes its head to get the blood off its face, and it then goes in for another bite, and this time, biting the man's throat and pulling away sharply, and it appears as a piece of flesh hanging from the victim's head. The video then ends as the mauling is still taking place. There's rumors that there's a longer version of this video, but I haven't seen it yet. According to reports, the attack lasted about 10 minutes until the bear was finally shot and killed, but the injuries the victim had would result in his death. I don't recommend looking for this video, mainly because of the graphic nature, but also because the screams of the victim are definitely the worst screams you will ever hear. Just imagine being attacked by a bear and being pinned down underneath it, while it just rips you apart and there's nothing you can do. The thought of that is just absolutely horrific.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
In Boston in the 1960s, women were terrified. Deadbolts and door chains were selling out as news spread about a serial killer on the loose. For a span of 2 years, vulnerable women were being murdered at a shocking rate. The mystery killer was seemingly targeting women, both young and old, and random neighborhoods, making everyone a potential target. Disturbingly, the killer seemed to leave a very specific calling card. The victims were essayed, posed, and then left with bows around their necks made of their stockings or underwear. The first murder was in June 1962. The Boston Strangler broke into the apartment of 55-year-old Anna Sleesers. She was strangled to death with her dressing gown. 2 more women were killed just weeks later. Nina Nichols and Helen Blake were found dead with a signature bow around their necks. Murders unfolded in quick succession following the first 3. In total, there were 11 known killings. Until 1964, police investigations reached dead ends. Then a convicted S offender, Albert DeSalvo, shockingly admitted to being the killer. He'd been arrested for breaking into a woman's apartment, tying her up and assaulting her. He confessed to breaking into hundreds of women's apartments and bragged about essaying at least 4 women. However, police didn't take the claims seriously initially. Albert didn't match the eyewitness descriptions they had of the Boston Strangler, and there was no physical evidence linking him to the crimes. He was actually sent to hospital for the criminally insane, and he was never convicted of the horrific crimes that he confessed to. A forensic psychiatrist found that he was a compulsive confessor who desperately needed to be recognised. 8 years later, he was stabbed to death by a fellow inmate, and due to his death, questions remained unanswered. That is, until a DNA test in 2013. Albert's body was exhumed due to advancements in technology. Now, DNA from Albert matched fluids left on a victim, Mary Sullivan's bed. Albert's family claimed that his DNA being at the scene didn't prove that he'd actually killed her, which is true. However, due to also confessing to the murder, police consider this is pretty damning evidence. It doesn't, however, confirm anything about all of the other victims in the Boston Strangler case, and some of the mystery still remains.
I think it's really freaky that people don't talk more about the connections that Epstein had in so many different worlds. So if somehow you don't know the Jeffrey Epstein story, he was arrested in 2019 and thought to be the head of a global pedophile network. And just a short while after he was arrested, he was found dead in his prison cell. Allegedly, he had taken his own life. Many people don't think that he did. And many people think that Epstein was murdered because he had so much blackmail evidence on so many politicians, actors, musicians. So let's dig a little bit deeper into all of this. So this is Shantae Davis. She's one of Epstein's accusers. She was there on so many of Epstein's trips. She alleged that he assaulted her many times over the years when she was underage. And she saw lots of horrific things that were going on the island, in his private planes, on these trips. Here's a photo of Shantae and Epstein, but I want to talk today about a trip to Africa that this group took. So apparently some years ago, Shantae, Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and some others took a philanthropic trip to Africa. But who was on this trip? Well, Bill Clinton was on this trip. There's photo evidence of that. I mean, here's a photo literally of Shantae massaging Bill Clinton's back while they were on this trip. Strange photo. Kevin Spacey was also on this trip. You can see Bill Clinton behind him. Here's another photo of Kevin Spacey and Ghislaine Maxwell. Kind of weird, right? Even Chris Tucker was on this trip. This is him and Shantae and some of the other women that were with Epstein and his crew. So my question is, what exactly happened in Africa? What were they doing? There are no real photos of any philanthropic event that they were attending. And for the life of me, I can't find any information about where they were going or what this big event with Hollywood celebrities and ex-presidents was. And I mean, there are just too many weird things about this. When Epstein's house was raided, they found this painting hanging up in his home. This has been confirmed. Even the artist who painted it has confirmed that Epstein purchased this from him. And people think that Epstein was killed because when he was hanging out brushing elbows with all these elite people like ex-presidents, celebrities, other people that were super powerful, he was recording almost all the time. Shantae, who was present for a lot of this, even said that Epstein had cameras in places like the bathrooms, the toilets, the massage rooms, the living rooms. Everywhere on his property was being recorded 24/7. So I think it's very reasonable to think that with what was going on with Epstein, he would have a lot of damning photos and videos, evidence of powerful people doing terrible things. And what's one way to get him to shut up? Well, you can kill him. I don't know. I just think this story about this philanthropy trip to Africa is so strange. Why did they go? Why all these famous people? Why is there no press about anything ever happening there? And once again, why with Jeffrey Epstein?
This could be one of the most awful ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture. In Canada, on July 30th, 2008, 22-year-old Tim McLean was on a bus traveling from Edmonton to Winnipeg. The bus then made a stop where a man named Vince Lee boarded. Vince Lee, a 40-year-old Canadian, suffered from untreatable schizophrenia, and without warning, he brutally attacked Tim McLean. Vince Lee sat next to Tim McLean, but Tim barely acknowledged him, and he then fell asleep against the window pane, with headphones covering his ears. According to witnesses, McLean was sleeping with his headphones on when the man sitting next to him, who was Vince Lee, suddenly produced a large knife and began stabbing him in the neck and chest. After the attack began, the bus driver pulled over to the side of the road, and he and all the other passengers fled the vehicle. The driver and 2 other men made an attempt to rescue McClane, but were chased away by Vince Lee, who slashed at them from behind the locked bus doors. Vince Lee decapitated Tim McClane and displayed his severed head to those outside the bus. Then he returned to Tim McClane's body and began severing other parts and consuming some of his flesh. Police arrived and Vince Lee was still on the bus, and the other passengers were huddled at the roadside, and some of them were crying and even vomiting. Vince Lee made an attempt to escape by driving the bus away, but the driver had engaged the emergency immobilizer system, which made the bus undrivable. Witnesses then saw Vince Lee stabbing and cutting McClane's body with a knife and carrying McClane's severed head around the bus. The police were in a standoff with Vince, and they had summoned a special negotiator and heavily armed tactical units. Police officers then observed Vince Lee eating parts of Tim McClane's body. And they also heard Vince Lee say, "I have to stay on the bus forever." Vince Lee then attempted to escape the bus again by breaking through a window, but was arrested soon afterwards, and he was shot twice with a taser, handcuffed, and placed in the back of a police car. Parts of the victim's body placed in plastic bags were retrieved from the bus, but Tim McClane's ears, nose, and tongue were found in Vince Lee's pockets. Tim McClane's eyes and heart were never found, and it was assumed that Vince Lee ate both of them. Vince Lee was found not criminally responsible for the murder due to his mental state at the time of the attack. The verdict was based on the assessment that Vince Lee was suffering from a severe mental disorder and was eventually committed to a mental health facility. I come across this case every so often, and it always hits the same. Tim McClane was so young, he was just 22 years old, and he didn't deserve this at all. And what makes this case even more sad is that 5 months after his death, his son was born. I get that Vince Lee was suffering from a severe mental disability, but I still would give him life in prison for doing this. This case is absolutely horrific, and it's definitely one of the worst out there.
Do not watch this video if you're home alone. When news of a serial killer on the loose spread, people were desperately calling the local security man to install security alarms on their homes. Little did they know, he was the killer. In January 1974, 4 members of the Otero family were murdered in Kansas. Their bodies were tragically discovered by the 3 older children who had been at school during the time of the murders. The killer took his next victims just months after this. He stalked and waited outside the home of young college student Catherine Bright. When she arrived home, he stabbed her and strangled her. He then shot her brother Kevin twice, but miraculously he survived. Kevin described the killer as having psychotic eyes. Intending to torment the local community, the mystery killer wrote a letter describing his killings. He left this in the public library and called a local paper to tell them where to find it. He stated he would kill again and named himself BTK, and no one knew what BTK stood for. He struck again in 1977. His 7th victim, Shirley Vian, was SA'd and killed while her 6-year-old son watched through the keyhole of the door. Now, shockingly, BTK at this point kept a sealed treasure chest of horrors at his family home. This is where he lived with his wife and children. It contained sick mementos from the crime scenes, including victims' underwear, driver's licenses, and pictures of him dressed up in the victims' underwear and reenacting the ways in which he'd killed them. Little did his family know that BTK, or Dennis Rader, was living a double life. His daughter described him as a strict Christian, and he helps keep the local community safe by installing security alarms on their houses. Now, business was booming as many vulnerable women contacted him to come and install security alarms on their homes amid the news of the BTK killer. When a neighbour was then killed by the BTK, Dennis reassured his family that they were safe. In actual fact, it was Dennis who had murdered the woman, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge, the night before. She was tied up and choked. In 1986, he killed his 9th victim, 28-year-old Vicky Wagirl, while her 2-year-old was in the playpen. In 1991, he committed his 10th and final crime. He broke into the home of 62-year-old grandmother Dolores Davis and killed her. He then dumped her body by a bridge. The panic died down and BTK wanted attention. It was now 2004 and he decided to send taunting letters to the media and police. He was actually caught by a letter he sent via floppy disk. Inside, police found data of a deleted file, and it was a document for the church. It was written by the church council president, Dennis Rader. A positive DNA match was found for Dennis under a victim's fingernails. He took pleasure in revealing that BTK stood for bind, torture, and kill. He also confessed to all of the murders. He was sentenced to 175 years in jail without the possibility of parole.